Hey, hello. Welcome to another guitar in the Real Love Guitars Getting Colder shed. This is Hugh's Washburn A15V, and it's kind of Explorer, Thunderbird, Firebird, Songbird thing. It's a kind of strap in an offset kind of glam rock body, and it's got a trem built in which is set to down only, and it's a pretty funky looking rock and roll beast, and it's a made in Japan number from the Matsumoto factory by the sounds of it, by the looks of it. And yeah, it's got all that lovely, great 70s mojo. So it's in here basically for a refret and setup. The frets are flat as pancakes, so I've ordered in some fret wire, which is here. A Tuscan nut for replacing one that I've just used up. So yeah, it's a cold Saturday night here in Devon. Well, it's not really that cold, but it's colder than it's been, so feeling a little bit on the cold side. So just going to do the fret pulling really tonight on this, and call it quits, because I have things to do in the house, getting ready some guitars to go out to customers and stuff. One of them is the Jazz Trekkie custom made, going to customer in New York City, so that's exciting and scary all in one go. So here we have the fret wire, all parts fret wire. This is 2.7 wide and 1.3 tall, so it's not my usual big jumbo, but it's copying the size on a guitar that Hugh brought along. Pardon me, Hugh brought along to show me the kind of frets the way he liked them. So I measured them up, and we're going for the closest we can get to that. I'm just going to briefly plug this in. I'm not going to play it at all loud because it's 8 o'clock and I don't want to annoy anyone. But just to make sure the electrics work. It's got one of those sharp stick-on jack sockets that vintage Telecasters tended to come with, which I don't like at all. I much prefer the screw-in electro socket things. At least you know they're in place. This is bizarre. Struggling to plug that in. Right. So just want to hear it, make sure everything does work. Crunchy. Wow, that's quite a bright sound. Get some cleaner in there, but I think we also need to use it a lot. That usually is the best way of clearing it out. Okay, they work. Need some contact cleaner. They've got that sort of similar tone to the West Tone Concord 2, if I remember, another one of Hugh's guitars, but a nice sounding single coil. I'm not keen on the bridge on this, but the neck sounds nice. Anyway, but it's a Washburn and it's going to be refretted, and we're going to clean up that fingerboard as well. To do it, we're going to need to remove and put a new nut on. I'm also going to, you need to remind me that I put the strap there, because I'm forever taking the strap off and then losing it, or forgetting to put it in the case with the guitar on the way back. So, okay, so simple process. It's not that simple. The reason why it's not that simple is because it's a set neck, but it's not just a set neck, not just a set neck, it's also a kind of curvy one, which means you know, it's a tapered one, nicely fitted, so it makes clamping more difficult if you're going to clamp. So the question on this, first of all, we can't clamp obviously with can't be doing any clamping with the, we could only clamp so far on this neck by using the press, and of course if we do that, then we have to switch to some other form or some other method to get the frets in when you get up to this end, because you can't get it through the fret press. So which means there would be two different kinds of pressure, because it's not consistent all the way up. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but I kind of prefer to be doing it one way or the other. So I think what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to probably tap it in. I don't just use a fret hammer. I don't particularly like the idea of using just a fret hammer, because I find the fret hammer puts too much of a blow in one particular place and can actually deform the fret. So I use a set of oak, or some oak blocks, or a mixture of oak blocks that are shaped to the radius I'm after, and they spread the load across the fret when you're hammering it in. I find that seems to work quite well for me, so I'll probably do that. We've got the tied over or double back strings here, which are a little bit difficult to get off. Yeah, so that's the, okay. I thought that was locked off. No, it's not. It's pressing down. Yeah, so it's got to be a different technique, not the press. Excuse me. But I've done lots of necks with tapping them in. Like many things, it depends on getting everything, the slots clean, and preparing everything the best we can do. Now here we've got something that Hugh asked me about, and that is we've got the plate on the back here is buckled, and it's annoying him. So what I'm going to look at is just, when I take it off, I'm going to see if it's permanently buckled, and if it is, we can flatten it out. But we may have to widen the holes on one of the screw holes to allow it to seat back down, but without causing the plastic to ride up and buckle again. So I suspect that it's, yeah, well, it's hard to tell. It's not that, it doesn't look like it was that tightly fitted. So, but I found in the past it can be a very small amount of misplacement of the hole versus the underlying hole to end up with a curved thing. But actually I have a feeling, yeah, that's what's causing it. It's this here. The trem claw is sticking up too far, which is causing it. It's pretty straightforward. So we'll have to come up with some other solution to that. I'm going to put the bits from here and here. It might even make sense to grind this down. I don't want to try bending these are huge, great trem claw screws. I don't want to try bending them down. So just looking at this, to get a decent fix on this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this strap button, so we've got a flat surface to, when we come to tapping the frets in here, I don't want it rocking over this strap button at that point. So we'll take it out for its own safety, and then also at this point I'm going to now what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep these strings. They're good for sacrificial strings for once we've refretted it. We're going to need some on here to do the fret leveling, which is pretty almost inevitable. So the thing about that is you have to bend out the strings if you're going to reuse them, otherwise they just get tangled and you can't withdraw them properly, which takes a bit of faffing about, and then somebody will write into YouTube and complain about having to be forced to watch some bloke bending used strings, which is, well, who knows. You don't need to be shown how to do it, and as anyone who watches these knows, I don't edit, so I shan't be taking that out. So first couple of strings out. If you can just pull them all out, that would be nice, but usually the bending, curling gets in the way. That's not too bad. I still have to straighten them out before I try and thread them back through, and usually the top E doesn't want to go through at all, or it breaks beforehand, so we end up using a spare one normally. This has already become a pile of rubbish, which I don't think I'm going to very easily straighten out at this rate. In which case, if it's totally tangled up, I just tend to rip it, chop it up and throw it in the bin, because it's too much trouble. But we should hopefully just get away with these. And we've got some we can use. Probably need it. Look at these things, they're so annoying. It's chopping my finger off now. That's never going to go through. That's what you get when you double bend them over to lock them in place. Oh, what an absolute royal pain that is. I can't undo this. It's not gonna work. I poured it out, but I won't be able to rethread that. Pain though it is. Okay. And that's the other problem of having unstraightened strings, is they grab everything in their path. They're completely annoying. I'll put one wrap around and see if we can save them for sacrificial use. And if not, if I can't, then so be it, I'll use something else. Okay, so for this we're going to need to remove the truss rod cover, and to begin with we're going to take the nut off. It's a shame in a way because the nut is nicely fitted, but it's got a low first fret action as it is, so there's no way we're going to be able to put on brand new frets that are going to be as high as these are and use the same nut. We don't have a choice in it. It's got to come out. Now it's one of those that has been fitted into the or it's been lacquered over, polyed over, so we have no choice as well but to sever that nice connection if we're going to remove this, and that is just a matter of scraping or cutting, whatever way you want to see it, to break the poly to get it out, hopefully without cracking tons more of it. And that feels like it's done it there. This one doesn't look quite so polyed into place. It's also, the bone is actually split here, but we'll replace it with a new one. So just, there you go, the nut is actually ready to come out at that point. It's actually been shimmed before with a piece of, looks like a piece of plastic under there. Maybe I'm imagining, no, that's a little bit of the lacquer or poly. Right, so that's that. This is an interesting shaped neck. It's got a real pronounced V in the neck, which is one of the prime reasons why Hugh likes it so much. Okay, so with this neck, what we're going to want to get is a flat neck. No, sorry, we're not going to do a flat. We want a backbowed neck to help release the frets from their slots. And we'll use a bit of water too. So first thing I'm going to do is a little bit relief curl. I'm going to tighten it up. Not with this. I'm going to use a different device. I'm not actually sure of the size of this hex key attachment. It might even be a 5mm one, in which case I'm equipped with that. So it is 5mm. So I'm going to, God, it doesn't want to come out. I'm going to try tighten that up to put some back bow in it, and I'll use the this one. Okay, much better grip. A little bit of back bow on one side and actually none in the other, so that's a little curious because it's flat here and raised there, so we have to just keep an eye on that. The purpose of this at the moment is to help the frets release their grip on the wood release its grip on the frets. So that is quite backbowed here, but barely anything on this side. Curiouser and curiouser. So we're going to need a soldering iron for this, and we're going to, there's so much grime on this fingerboard, we're going to get some water from a very dark and mucky pot of water, but it doesn't really matter, it's just going to be water for the time being, and we're going to wet up the frets. I'm just worried about making it wet to begin with, just to soften it a little bit. Okay. And then put this off to one side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come at it from the back to front direction, so that the usual thing that I prefer to do is that if in removing these frets it sort of struggles to lift the fret to begin with, then we won't be making any crimping marks down at the playing, on the side where the fingers really feel it. I'd rather any kind of compression on the fretboard edge was on the top side. That's just one consideration. And so I'm going to begin with the soldering iron down here, and we're going to start off by heating a little bit down here, and because they're so low, this is actually now potentially going to be quite tricky to get a bite under the fret. Right, as soon as I've got one, I'm going to move on to the next one and then come back and do them all. And what I'll do is I'll try and get a bit more water under there. So this part sometimes just crimps at tiny, or pinches I should say, a little tiny bit of the binding under the fret. It's kind of nigh on impossible to do it without that happening, as you can see. And that's made a mark on there. I'm going to have to fix that. Would you believe it? That's because it's so close. Yeah, that's a very, very tightly mounted fingerboard. Yeah, can't really reach it. Probably need one hand only to do this. And that's it, it's lifting. Okay, we're moving. That's annoying. I have to match a colour and make a repair. Let's just tip back on this thing. You can see that you have to use a bit of force, and it's quite difficult to manoeuvre around there at all. and this flared edge of here tipped backwards too far. Damn it. But we'll get the fill and finish out, and we'll get a colour and touch it up, and then we'll polish it back and we'll buff it out. In fact, while I'm at it, then I might do a few more of the little marks on the front as well, since we'll be in that mode. See what colour blues we've got in the paint department. In fact, I've got a blue that could just do this. There are quite a few chips on this guitar, so it'll give me a good excuse to do a few of them as well. I'll take care of that one. I saw a great video the other day, by the way, about somebody who finishes guitars with fill and finish, the glue boost stuff, which is quite incredible. He rubs it on and makes a shiny, hard finish, and I watched him do it on the video, and I kind of couldn't quite believe it, how it was actually happening. See, these are much looser typically, just coming out or lifting up easily. See that? See this? You have to tip back a little bit, and that's what I did up there. Too far. Right, those are lifted. And come back with a bit more water. Under there. Just to soften it a tiny bit. It isn't very clean. As you can see, it's been used for other things, but it's what I've got here right now, and it's fine because I shall scrape or re-radius this board anyway, so it's not a big deal. Okay, now we're going to come back and remove the rest, again very carefully working across. Now re-radiusing is going to be quite challenging too, simply because this is such a low profile fingerboard. We don't have a lot of room, as you've seen, to work with a radius block without hitting other things. Should be able to do it, but just have to be extremely careful, and I'd probably, if my brain had been alive, I would have masked that off, simply because it's too close. And any rocking of the pliers is going to do what it just did there. But you know, this is real life guitars, and it happened, so I'm going to have to deal with it. No editing, mistakes and all. Pretty good. There's not a lot of chip out coming up here. A little bit, but nothing that's going to need fixing, because any of it will be underneath the crown of the new frets anyway. So I'm just going to go and I'm going to have a look at the various blues that I've got for filling, just a colour fill there, and I'll put the we do the glassy finish with glue boost stuff, which is really good. The only downside is I've run out of the accelerator, so you just have to wait longer. That's the thing they get you. You get tons of the glue boost fill and finish stuff, but the aerosol accelerant, which really works well, runs out pretty quickly, so you end up having to buy more. and it isn't cheap. Okay, water hissing there. So once you've done the fill and finish repair, the good thing is then you can buff it out, which I'll do with this. It will mean taking the pick guard and the components out, but that's okay. We've got a couple of weeks to do this, so there's no rush. But then might as well do the other ones, the major ones. There's so much DNA on this fingerboard, it's unfunny. So after this I'm going to measure the radius, bend the frets to the radius, and just get the new set of frets cut and prepared, and then spend a bit of time cleaning the fret slots and making sure they're good. Now I'll have a look at the other dings on this body and see whether it's worth basically taking the electrics out, you know, taking the pick guard out or the whole stuff out. I think it probably is, because then I can give it all a clean up as well as doing those repairs. So, and then it's naked, ready for buffing, which is much better situation. And to that end, I'll take the tuners off as well, because I can also give them a clean. I think taking the bridge off means I can clean that up too. So this guitar will look a ton fresher by the time it's back together. So let's do that now. Also, there is something amiss with this jack socket, so I think we would look to replace that with an electro socket anyway, so that it doesn't ever come out, which it's liable to if it's got the normal old-fashioned fixing. You see the scratches and chips here, so we could do those at the same time. If we're doing one, in for a penny, in for a pound. The only slight downside is that there's a made in Japan sticker on it, which is kind of hard to polish round, but we'll see if we can protect that and work around it when it comes to buffing. Of course, they would have put that on after the factory buffing. Okay. Let's take the what's it? It springs out. I'll get the bridge out too. Nice big solid block on this thing. Good quality. Heavy duty. While I'm here, looking at the way this sits up above the thing, we could actually probably easier now to take this off and grind it down on the grinder over there. So we'll probably do that. Just to reduce it in size, a couple of leftover frets there. I'm going to sort out a new set of screwdriver heads, because I don't know where these are all going. Need something a bit smaller. This is filthy, could do with a good clean up. It's not quite the right size either. Wish to use one of those. Maybe. The thing is, actually it's not such a bad deal having to take this all off, because it gives me a much better chance to get in and take care of the electrics as well, which we know are in not such a good condition. Okay, we've got the soldering iron on. Let's do a couple of things. Get this off. Come on, turn round. So prior to coming out here in the shed tonight, I answered an ad in the Cornwall and Devon music press thing, band finder, and it's an ad I saw posted in the one of the Join My Band things a little while back, by somebody, a transgender drummer called Lily, who wants to start up a disco 70s glam show band, kind of big band, which I really like the sound of, actually, having kind of played in some covers bands before. It sounded like quite a lot of fun, so I replied to her, and I'm going to give her a call tomorrow. Can I get this undone? This is not behaving itself. Maybe will we change this? Let's have a look. Come back to that in a minute when I've got this off. Yeah, so it was, this could be quite an interesting direction to go in, and why not? Imagine that, a great big show band with 6-7 people in it playing funky disco numbers from the 70s and 80s. Right, this is not, that's split there, look. This isn't doing what I want it to do, so I'm going to, can't get enough heat in there, so I'm going to cut that down here, and we'll reinstall that later on, because it just won't get enough heat into there. Yeah, so it could end up being in a strange big disco show band, fronted by a transgender session drummer. How cool is that? Anyway, sounded like fun, so let's see what comes of it. Two more. Of course, my homemade guitars, none of them would really totally suit that style, so I'd have to get something much more 70s-tastic, rock and roll-tastic. Okay, so this right now, this little thing here is putting up a fight to not to want to come out. So if I can just grasp the thing long enough to continue turning it, but it is difficult to make it go round. It seems to be catching on the way out, like there's a bit of a knackered thread on the way out, which is not fantastic. So the basically it's not going past, this nut isn't coming past the end of it, which is a bit crap. Doesn't seem to want to do it. Don't seem to be able to turn it at all beyond this point. hope somebody hasn't thread locked it or something. Oh God, come on, this is horrible. We're going to get anywhere near coming off. Yeah, maybe. Close. Come on. No, it's not gripping now. Annoying. I don't want to cut this. I could. It would make life a lot easier because I wouldn't be dragging this around with me. I could do that probably. Why don't I do that just to make life a little simpler right now? Yeah, well, that was already pretty much broken off anyway. Right, let's put that over here. And then have a better look if I can. It definitely is not wanting to cooperate. This is not great TV, I know, but I'm just trying slowly but surely to unhook this. Yes, thank you. Now if that is secure, we'll put it back in there afterwards, but right now I just wanted to get that out. Oh, look at the goo that's in there with it. That barely even fits. Wow. So basically, that is incredibly tight fit. In fact, it's not even meant to come out this way. I don't think it can come out this way. So they must have pushed that in there from the beginning. Ew. There's a sort of cut out slot that's like you're supposed to be able to get in there, but they must have. Why have they done that if you can't pull it out this way? Bizarre, isn't it? There's like a little edge of wood there that you can't get it over. I mean, it's pretty much broken off there anyway, but how weird. That is so strange. That's like cut out as if you're meant to be able to get it out, and then it doesn't have room for it to come out. It can only come out all of the unit out this way, but once it's pushed in, it's locked in place effectively. So that isn't such a good idea. How come they've made that too small to pull out the jack socket, and yet there's a recess cut as if you're meant to be able to get it out? I mean, that's going to make putting another one back in there the same way pretty awesomely difficult, unless it's got a little bit of a reset cut further into it, like it was meant to be. How weird. Right, this is not going to be very interesting. Okay, I'm going to come back to that. I don't want to have to pull, well, I suppose I'm going to pull this out because it's going to come out anyway. And for that, I will need something that wants to come out. See, I can't lever it out because I can't get down there. I can't get up there that way to encourage it to come out. Boo! Right, I'll spend boring time taking care of that. Meantime, let's check the radius of I'll take the tuners off and we'll check the radius now of the neck, and then we'll get the frets bent ready and we'll call that quits. And what do we think it is? Any guesses? 12? That's the claw making a noise. That's a bit tighter than a 12. It's a 9.5. It's 9.5. Oh, it's a compound radius. Ooh. Okay, so that means I'm not going to do anything with a radius block, that's for sure. So I think then we've got a compound radius. Yep, and that has probably gone to 9.5 to 12, possibly even a bit flatter. That's 14. Well, it's compound anyway. That looks spot on 14 there. Okay, 9.5 to 14. So that means we're going to have some fun bending the frets as well. So I'm going to have to make a series of bends, or a series of, to get it right I want to mark up the I think I already have it marked for a different fret gauge, but I can mark the bender and I can make a series of grades between 9.5 and 14 and sort of roughly work out how many I need in the stages in between. Of course they won't all be exact because I can't make each one exactly the right length, the right radius, but I'll make them close. But I'll need to work it out first, and with a bit of drawing, and I'll probably put the bender down here so I can make the tiny adjustments. I did that before a couple of times, so it would have to be a compound radius. Okay, well I'm going to do that off camera because it's slow, and I'm going to get this sorted out off camera because that's also going to be slow, and also check out the bits and pieces where I'm going to do little repairs and stuff and have that ready. So I'll come back when I've got the frets cut and ready to go. See you in a bit. Wow, I only just managed to get that damn camera started. Yeah, all kinds of problems. It's run out of batteries and then it wouldn't start up on anything but USB mode, which wouldn't allow me to record, and it wouldn't hold a charge long enough to get it started, blah blah. Anyway, the point is, here we are lining up the frets, new frets for Hugh's Washburn. I've also filled in some holes at the end here, the dings, the one I made, and a couple of others, which I didn't actually wait. I was going to get some paint, or got some paint coming, which might be the right colour, but I haven't got anything that's dead exact, so I kind of I didn't colour those in, I just filled them so they're smooth. But I'm going to put this, once I get the frets in, I'm going to tape them off, and then I'm going to put it onto the buffer and just buff everything out, give it a refresh. I'll probably do that tomorrow if there's a dry moment, a gap between showers. Can do it indoors, but I much prefer to do it out of doors. So what I'm doing here is I've got my little slot cut in here for holding a fret in place, and I'm just flattening off the tang undercut part of things. Hello Morris. It's funny he picks the moment I start filming to come in. Anyway, so because I couldn't get the camera started, I've got all these frets cut individually first, and next thing on the line will be tapping them in. Now, because this is a compound radius, everything here goes from 9.5 to 14 down to the end here, so it's quite a lot of change. And what I've got is a bunch of locks that I use, and I use those to tap the frets in. Now the thing about these is that it's obviously a constant changing radius in a slow progression down the fingerboard, so obviously neither of these frets are going to be exact all the way down, nor are the things I'm tapping them home with, but the idea of these are they're shorter than the whole thing, so they kind of, I get to tap them home around the radius, so it doesn't have to be absolutely precise. The ultimate arbiter of this will be the fingerboard, which holds everything where it should be. In other words, you can't go past the fingerboard radius. Sorry about that noise. Now I did had some fun when I bent these. I devised a system where I clamp my bender thing into the vise, and I do a couple of test bends with the correct correct gauge of fret wire that I'm using. And what I do is I mark where bending this kind of wire gives me a 9.5 inch radius, and then I mark where it gives me a 14, and then I divide it up between that, and I make a series of in-between stops. Now there isn't a hell of a lot of room, or it's not an awful number of turns, or not a lot of turning on the control device, the adjuster on the bottom of the bendernator. Stupid names. Anyway, but it's enough to get a fair approximation. So what we're going to get, or what we actually have got, is we've got 1 at 9.5 or 2 at 9.5, then we go to 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So in a way these are more accurately bent than these things I'm going to knock them in with, but that's kind of what I would expect. So it's quite a neat little way of doing it, and I can get pretty close with the radius, the changing compound radius. But as I say, the most important thing will be the fact that the underlying fingerboard is what tells us where we should be at. Now, with a compound radius, that obviously brings with it some other challenges. Now, the first one is you can't take a radius block and scrape up and down the compound radius. So the only way you can level this is using is using the banana kind of adjustable leveling tool. And some people have asked in the past, how does that handle compound radius? And the funny part is, the answer, if I was being facetious, would be a damn sight better than any other fret leveling method that you would use on a compound radius. And then kind of haughtily throw my flowing locks back and stomp away from the table. And you could say to me, yes, but why does it, how come it's more accurate or better than standard methods? Well, the reason it is because it's thinner. And if I use the thinnest of my thingies, oh, I've got there's some on the way from Portugal, some rhino stick paper. Anyway, yeah, but if I use the very thin one of the two possible radius leveling beams, adjustable truss rod things, then if I were to use the thinner one, then we get lots of thin slices down the varying radii, and because if you're taking a very thin cross section of the radius here and a thin cross section of the radius down there, the difference between them is minimal. The difference matters only in the overall thing, in the cumulative thing. So when you know that this is flatter as a cumulative overall radius, but taking a full mil snapshot of each of these and holding them up together, you would struggle to see the difference. And as far as the leveling tool is concerned, the difference in this plane is absolutely marginal, or minimal, I should say. So, you know, that's trust me, if I'm giving you an answer to this conundrum, it is because I've thought it through plenty of times. And actually, I don't mind people asking that question, but I think the thing that pisses me off fastest of all is when people imagine that I do leveling the way I do it without having thought of this, you know, without having considered this problem. And it's that assumption that I'd just be sort of doing it willy-nilly, and that I hadn't spent just a minute or two thinking it through. That's quite galling, actually. So I try to keep good grace when I reply to people on this subject. So technically, I could pretty much just tap all of these in right now without glue, because they're all in, you know, fairly nicely fitting. Now the thing about there's an interesting situation here now. Again, it's not to do with the compound radius, but it's to do with the fret slots. If you have, if you were installing, let's say you had a guitar with very thin or very narrow gauge thingies, you know the things I'm talking about, narrow gauge frets, and the tangs were very narrow, then what you might get is, if you're using very large jumbo frets, is you might get a mismatch between, it's possible to get a mismatch between the width of the slot and the size of the tang, and in which case, if you were to bang those in, you get a kind of spreading of the wood, and it can produce back bow in the neck. With a non-bound and unbound neck, you can take a saw of differing dimensions and use that to cut a wider slot, so your frets fit in, but you know, they're snug, but they're not pushing the wood back. Excuse me. So the question is, you know, can you tell the difference between what you've got now, the new frets, and what you had before? And about the only way you're really going to know is to do a combination of using the feeler gauges again. So what we've got a 0.7 here. We try and get the feeler gauges in. They won't go in at 0.7. They go in at 0.4, and I think they'll probably turn out to be about 0.5 millimeter. You've got to find these lose their markings very easily. 0.10. They're supposed to be in order, but it can be quite difficult to even see that bit. So what I'm looking for 4 and 1, 4 and 0.1 to get to about 50. Okay, so 0.5 we can do. Now when we come to measure this on here, we're looking to measure between the tang teeth, and we don't want to do the kind of the tang this way because it's slightly wider. We want it in the narrow bit. Now this is 0.6, and that is slightly bigger. And the question is, so we know that straight away, and that's why they're sitting quite neatly in here. Now the question you've got to ask yourself is, what happens if I tap home these? Now the fact is, it's wood, it's soft, pliable, malleable, whatever the word might be, and you'll be able to tap it in. But will I create a load of back bow that's going to create a problem? Well, possibly. So the ideal situation would be that you're able to widen the fret slots. However, you have a binding on here, so you can't put a saw through it of a bigger diameter. So you're going to have to do something, you're going to have to come up with something else. And I can only really think of running something through it that is capable of widening it up. Now, if I use this little homemade fret cleaning saw, you can buy these fret cleaning saws at different dimensions. Now this one happens at the tip to be exactly the right size. It's 0.66, which the frets were. But the problem you've got is, you might be able to get it in, but how much can you widen it? What sort of, you know, what worthwhile can you actually do? We can see that we could get it in and kind of drag it around and possibly pull out a bit of goo and widen it. But let's just double check this. Reset. Okay, it varies depending on where you put it. I'll say this is actually 7.5, right? On second looks. Now this is 6.6, so this is a little bit small for this job here. Now, question is, what do we have? Well, we might have something that fits in that slot perfectly, but the problem is, do we have anything that will help to widen it? And you know, in what way can we widen it? If we just tap the frets in, the danger is we're gonna bend the neck rather than widen the slot. Now, as it stands right now, I don't actually know what I'm going to use to widen these slots out that's going to work in any useful way. I've got a few of these funny, what are they called? Pipe cleaner, welding nozzle cleaner things. They've got a little bladey sort of file type of feel on the end of them. But to be honest, what's that? one. To be honest, they probably, even if they go in, they're not going to really cut anything easily. So there's a 0.8, for example. Now if I were to see whether that even fitted in, I mean, first of all, the front bit here, it hasn't got any cutting power to it, so that's not really going to work. We need something that's going to cut. Now we've got a load of fret files here, and they're not really going to do anything because their cutting edge is only on the underside. But let's see what would come close in terms of dimensions. 0.66, kind of close. So that just about fits in. 24, let's go to 32. And that's just about on the mark. So, and if we look at it across this way, we're looking at 80. So that's just fractionally over what the tang, the narrow part of the tang is. So there's an option there. We could try and open this up a bit by compressing the wood a little bit. You could probably do something like that. You might say, well, wouldn't it be better with a slightly tapered thing? But like I say, there's nothing on there that's going to cut this out. An alternative would be to take something quite a bit smaller, maybe even as small as a 12, and if we put a little bit of sandpaper on there, self-adhesive sandpaper, you never know, we might find that we can actually use that. So I'm going to use a bit of very old sticky sandpaper, but I'm just going to borrow it for a minute, see if it will actually stick. I've got a sneaky feeling it's not sticky enough, but we'll have a look at it. So we're kind of making things up. Now this is 400 grit, so it isn't going to shift a lot very quickly. And I'm just going to bend this over here, and we're a bit past the end, which is going to make it a bit wobbly. So I just try and tidy that bit up, get it out of the way. Alright, so here we have something that fits in. Ooh, kind of goes up and down. It's going to cause a bit of tear out there because it's sort of pulling out a little bit, or it's tight at one end. So just sort of running it backwards and forwards. We could probably make an impression on this. You can see that. So I'm being very careful because obviously I don't want to crash into the binding and destroy that. So if we come back to our, what did we say we had? We had 32. 32 was our marker, wasn't it? 32 was about where we wanted to be. So 32 now, you can see, fits in where it didn't quite before. So we could even gently widen it like this with a bit of compression. It will compress the wood. It's not going to be pushing it backwards, but it's going to probably need to be a mixture of those things if we want to avoid ending up with some back bow in this thing. This is quite mild, this paper, and it's sort of pretty much lost its bite after the first go, so it might be something really dreary like having to do it, change it for each fret, which or each slot, which could be something of a pain. So what we're kind of looking for is the fret to kind of sit in there nearly comfortably in without having to hit it too hard. We didn't double check our sizes of stuff. That's coming in at 83. It's a bit bigger than we need. And we came in at, what we needed was about, well, it varies depending on how you grab it, but sort of trying to tell me about 75. So yeah, that's the way we can do it. As you can see, that it's only the bottom part of this that really does the work, so we're going to run out of bite before too long. So it might be you want to make up a whole load of them, but I'm sort of slightly twisting on this as well to give it a bit of bite at each end, but it's really, really important that you take time for this bit now, because otherwise, you know, it's going to be, you'll tap these all in and then there'll be a problem, and you can do without that. So there's our kind of guide one, sitting in at 32, fractionally over, but 24 is too small. I mean, equally we could try a bit of this on 24. We don't need much on the end, so let's make a much smaller piece to go with. Right. So let's put this one in for a minute and try the next one on its own. So just, yeah, no doubt StewMac has a special device. I can't quite imagine what it's going to be. Something, it might even be a spinning thing that somehow widens this all out. So this is just on the size, as you can see. It's just sort of 24 goes in there, but without the paper on it. So if we try getting the paper in, it just sort of goes in. It would sort of get there. Now it's kind of making it stick up a bit. Can't really think of another way of doing this without having to, you know, use an object to wrap the paper around. You can see it's trying to cut away a little bit. So I think that's probably a little bit too big, the 24. So we could go for the 16. Again, we'll cut it close. This is a very old paper that came with my original katana that I bought a long time ago. But that's another story for another day, children. Okay, so the 16 just about fits in and starts to try and widen with the paper. And you can see it's quite a tight fit, and it's trying to stick, and it's trying to cause a bit of tear out. And it's pulling the paper as much as anything else. So possibly the smaller size is the best one to do it, as we had originally, but bearing in mind we're going to just need to keep replacing the paper and cutting it shorter, I guess. This is a 320 grit actually, so again it's quite light, but if we just cut off the used bit, chuck it on the floor, and then go in with this one. I think the 12 is the best size to be working with. So you can see we can get start getting quite a good bite on it. It's not going to cut hugely quickly. What if I got a more bitey thing? Did we use it all up? Oh, maybe we've got a little bit left here. This is the remnants of my, oh, lots of little remnants actually. Short one, so let's use a little bit of this. See how this works. This is 220 grit. Let's try a bit of this on one of these, so that can go away. That's just a bit sticky. That it's more sticky than it is effective. This feels quite chunky on its own. So if this doesn't work wrapped around the 12, what I would suggest doing is I'll have a go with it on its own. I'm not really being very efficient with the cutting part, but so if we look at it as doubled over on its own, it's actually probably quite thick. So it may be too thick for the little file. Okay, so that's kind of cutting quite well in there. We'll probably get there at this rate with this 220. It's a bit meatier than the other stuff. Yeah, that's not bad actually. So, so our guide was this one. Still not quite there, but not far off. And we had, let's try it with this now. We did it with a bit of paper on its own first. Now we'll try it with this. It could be. Cutting with the corner of it first. And hopefully getting the other end in. Not a bad technique actually. And then use the top bit. Still quite stiff. Wow, you can feel that catching. So it sort of works, but it's a slow old thing. And then we try our 32 again, and I can see that we're getting there bit by bit. Now whatever happens, it's tiring and boring, time consuming and so on, but whatever happens is we'll end up with a better fit and less back bow curvation, less back bow curvature than we had before. And it's just a matter of judicious use of this kind of paper. So get some in there. Feels like it's doing quite a bit of work in that sort of configuration. Have to keep an eye on the any build-up of stuff at the end. It's trying to flake out some bits here, which is annoying. In a sense, what's probably a good idea to do now is to pick all these up for the time being, loosen them all off, and then pick them back up with the Gorilla Tape and get them out of the way while we concentrate on widening the slots. Fortunately, there's no kind of liquid white plastic that would fill these end in the binding and look credible. That would be a really simple, a much simpler solution. But luckily, it's not really playing ball. Not the best grab I've ever done, but it's short and sharp and functional. Right, so I'm going to turn the thingy off. I'm going to have to watch out. I'm going to have to get some glue ready and watch out for little flake ups, which are going to be an absolute pain. Oh well, there goes one. It's just dropped off. Well, that's not much help, is it? It's minor, but it's annoying. So nothing I can do about it. We could fill it with a bit of rosewood later on, but we are up against the challenge of having to basically widen these up very, very carefully by hand in some way or other, and probably like this to begin with, so we can get past the pulling stage, and then once that's opened up a little bit, maybe use the one with the thingy in it. We could even go to a feeler gauge, but that's harder to handle because it's set in a kit of feeler gauges. So the corners of this seem to do a pretty good job. You know, we can extend the life of each piece by flipping to the next corner or a new corner, just running it. It doesn't really run the risk of breaking anything like the binding at the other end, but it does feel like it needs to run in both directions. So we might need to change the whole thing around and go the other way now, and then also be squeezed flat there. Of course the blade can pull out any gunge that's in the slot, but we want to get in there, and we need really to be pulling it backwards and forwards like this to get the widening that we need. We can afford to miss the ends because the tang is undercut anyway, so we're not going to run not going to run into any trouble there. So once we've got that done, then we can basically try and run it this way. A little bit reluctant by this point, and we're going to end up bending the nut file, but that's not too bad. Sort of feel. So we've got a kind of guide that if we can get the end of that one in there, we're heading in the right direction. I mean, there's always a, you know, we could use a, you know, a fine screwdriver to widen it. You could probably even do it like that with a little bit of turning, but that's a bit guessing, so I prefer to get to it slowly this way. So what I'm going to do is cut a load of little pieces to work with, and I'm not going to take the sticky off them, so there's going to be that added bit of width, but it means I can fold them in different ways and reuse bits of them. So that's going to be my boring little job. Never thought it was going to be that dreary to do this, but as I say, I can't really think of a simple way around it, and I can't really think of a tool that I quote unquote should have. I mean, there are different things, you know, there are saws for widening slots, there are special tools for crimping the tangs in a way to get more grip on them, so you can effectively widen the tang if you've got a too loose slot. But what you don't have, as far as I can see, is you don't actually have something that you can put in on a bound neck to widen the tang, so widen the slot. So we're kind of up against it there. So, all right, this is going to be boring. So I'm going to take off, and say if we pull out, which it's trying to do a little bit of now, because we're putting the slot under some stress by doing this. I'm going to need to look at any repairs for later on. Obviously I can't re-radius this, so any raised bits I'm going to need to just hand sand back. Anyway, I will get off and do this in the boredom of listening to the radio. I think it looks like the more I can do by hand with a piece on its own without the thingy in it, the better it will be. So if I can keep to one piece of this stuff per slot, we could be in luck. We might just end up with enough. Where was I? I'm thinking I'm in the wrong place at the moment. You probably see that I've just gone back to the wrong fret, but anyway, I don't know. I'll keep a better eye out in a minute. So once I get it moving freely, that feels like the business. And then, with a bit of luck, I should be able to get a different file in like that, and perhaps get a bit of a long run across like that. And what we're really doing is we're getting something like 80. That's probably about right. Yeah, that's fitting in nicely. So lots of these, some of that. See you in a bit. It's the next day. I'm getting ready to finish the refret on Hugh's Washburn. I'm also, by the way, I've just let you know, I have buffed it out on the machine. Ooh, and it's looking shiny. I'm also going to paint the cavities with conductive paint shortly. I might also widen the access hole with a chisel before I do that, just to get the jack in and out of here. That plug in the back here seems pretty solid, so I'm not going to wrench it out, but I will get a new jack plug in there anyway, jack socket in there anyway, a Nutric one. So here's the game now. We're going to go from basically from 9 to 12 to 14 down this neck, tapping these in, and for that I'm going to need some glue and some cocktail sticks for applying the glue, fiddly, and some glue. Now what I don't have, and it's on order, is that good old-fashioned stuff for removing it. What's it called? Debonder. But people keep telling me that there's all manner of things that do exactly the same job, not least nail varnish remover, which is acetone. Quickly removes all types of nail polish, and that is because it will be good for removing cellulose type stuff. But I have not used it on a guitar neck before, so I'm not 100% thrilled by the idea of doing that. So I'm going to proceed with as little mess as possible. I've done my best to clean up. There's a few little scrapes here and there. What's this? That's a little bit of fill and finish sticking up. I'll clean that off with that stuff, whatever it's called. The scratch remover, which I actually found the other one from, so I'll have that standing by. Anyway, so everything pretty much cleaned out and buffed up. So we're going to get on with this. Now this is going to be a process of tapping in the frets using sort of approximate radius blocks. Now this is not a precise science because that thing radius changes all the way along, so it's going to be appropriate or approximate from the outset, but that's okay. We're going to do our best to make it fit. So I've widened all the holes, I've cleaned them all out, the slots I should say, I've cleaned them all out again, and so everything should pretty much sit very nicely in there. And the glue is going to be just a little helping hand on this, so I think it's quite sticky, so I'm probably just going to aim for a little dab, tiny little dab on the ends, and it's kind of impossible to do this without handling it. And then I'm going to drop it in there like that. I'm going to put that up that end to support it, and I'm going to tap it in with my 9.5 radius supported there, and then have a quick look and see how that's sitting in. That looks pretty good. Bit of glue sticking up, so I'll get a thin device and try and just scrape a bit of it back. I prefer to use a sharp blade to clean up afterwards if I need to. Okay, that's looking quite good. Again, we're hitting down onto an oak block and supporting thing, and I'll move that along as we go. So that looks pretty good. Now when we get up here, I'm going to need to support it in other ways. I'm not going to, I'll sort of switch off in a minute because I've got, it's going to just be a slow process. And now with this, because it's tapped in and it's compound, I do expect to have to do a little bit of fret leveling afterwards. That would be definitely par for the course on this. So as I say, it will be no surprise to do that, and I'll do that with my freshly papered up my new paper on the ultra thin banana fret leveling tool. So let's have a quick look again. Yeah, they're sitting in nicely. Okay, so that's basically what I'm doing, but in a way you'll have seen that most of the hard work was in the preparation, and that's pretty much always the way. So and I'm just using a little bit of glue on the tang, a tiny bit really, hardly any, and a little bit on the overhangs, just so that if they need to, we help them stick on the wood, because they are overhangs and they don't have tangs. There's a rhyme. Okay, so that's the 9.5 block. So we're going to sort of start running into the 10s and the 11s, so I'll use it down here a little bit more, and then I'll switch over to the 12. The 9.5 really is right there, so it's 10 by there, sort of 11 by here, 12 by here. So we'll do another one at the 9.5 and then shift upwards. So like I said before, the curvature of these blocks is not really that important at this stage in the game. I mean, if I had time, I would make a whole set from, you know, 9 in half stages, but they're really not. What I would also do anyway is make them thinner, because I only want them to replace that. I don't like hitting the frets with this hard plastic. I'd rather hit them with a bit of wood. I mean, I tap them in with that, but I quite like the idea of kind of coming around like this to sync to everything. So yeah, it would be cool to have one of each radius, but they're so incredibly similar, and if I cut them down to half that size, it wouldn't really, that's the ideal size, and I'd kind of work along anyway. So it only needs, you could probably do one radius 12 for everything between 9 and 14, so it's just an added something or other, don't know what the word is, just helping it along really. The important bit is the bend of the frets to begin with and the surface that you're putting them onto. Okay, somebody asked me the other day, when it comes to beveling, or doing, there was a couple of questions about doing guitars with bindings, bound fingerboards, and of course to do a bound fingerboard you have to do the overhang thing that you've seen me do here, but also the slightly challenging thing is cleaning the slot out without being able to use the saw, as I've mentioned. That's a bit of an inconvenience, but anyway, a couple of people recommended using the Hosco sort of official fret file saw, it's a little thing, double-headed thing, and they look pretty good and they're great. I mean, they do what my thing here does effectively. It's serrated. I made that one myself, but it's a serrated edged thing that cuts downwards if you need it to. What I'm not at all sure about is whether it actually did what I need it to do, which is to widen it. So I think I'm kind of comfortable that I went with that method that I chose anyway. The challenge on these things is, especially on a flat angle here, you've got zero room to run the fret beveling file. So this one, when I get up to close to here, what I'm actually going to do, about from here, I'm going to actually hand file and I'm going to use a sanding block, and I'm going to keep checking, and I'm going to get these to almost exactly the right length, because I'm not going to get the beveling file into here, not without damaging the surface. So that's really inaccessible. So the closer we can get from the outset, the better. That's one of the challenges. On a Les Paul, you tend to have a little bit more room up here. The fingerboard tends to stick out a bit more, but on here it's not. It's very flat, so it isn't going to do that. Okay, so I'm going to stick that off and come back to you when that's done, and we'll see you in a minute. Okay, we're beginning the fret leveling process on the vintage made in Japan Washburn. For some reason this, what do they call it? Video camera. It's got this idea that it won't, hang on a sec, it's decided that it won't, if you put the power in, it won't start. It goes into USB mode. This thing has got such horrible spacing strings going over the nut. It's really awful. Anyway, I'm starting the fret leveling on this and just checking. It's actually quite low as it happens. It's very low, in fact, but a tad too low. But we'll use that as the start point, and then we'll raise it up if needs be. So I'm kind of happy with that first run on the E track. Now we're going to do the B track. Just Skyping, having a quick Skype call from my dad, and as always, he gets going, and the battery runs out. That's always the way. Call you later. Bye. Now the door's shutting of its own free will. So these frets are quite reasonably tall. They're not mega jumbo, but I've got a fair bit of room in the leveling department because they're fairly tall, and the ones that Hugh supplied or brought, the guitar he brought as an example, felt a little lower than these, so this bit of leveling will bring these back to hopefully the exact same feel as the ones on his Telecaster that he showed me as an example. But I had a difference in radius there. I was at length to say to him that when you, where's the, oh my lordy, where's it gone? There it is. I was at length to point out that it's quite tricky that when you when you compare frets on one guitar and you say, okay, I want it to feel like this, and then you measure the frets and you go ahead and buy the frets as close to that measured gauge as possible. And Hugh understands this, but sometimes it's worth explaining to other customers. But that doesn't add up to the same as it will feel the same as the guitar that you really like, and you've shown me as an example, because the frets are obviously one fairly small component of the overall feel of a guitar. So it's, sometimes I have to stress that point. I can get the frets to the same size, but you might be surprised how little it feels like the other guitar. This is very flat as well, but that's what I'm starting with. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to recalibrate this G track and just do another check on it. One of the things that, of course, is challenging with a guitar like this, with a couple of things. See, I've slacked that off too far. A couple of things, but one of them is the fact that it's compound radius. So when you put a new set of frets on, you can't use a radius block to level out. Now sometimes you tend to use a radius block for leveling, for the simple reason that a radius block imposes its fixed radius, whatever that happens to be, and it's usually fairly accurate if you get it from a good supplier, but it imposes that onto the frets that you've laid, whether they're technically exactly that radius or not. But that's okay, you can usually get away with it, although having said that, it is quite expensive in terms of fret metal, so I prefer not to do that. But even if I wanted to use a radius block for this process, you can't do it with a compound radius because it changes all the way down. So if you were to use a radius block on here, you would impose, if that was 14 and you used a 9.5 inch radius block, you'd make that 9.5 inches. It would take a while, but you would get it down there eventually. But you get the point that the radius block will be out of true with most of the frets on the neck, except a few, whichever radius you choose. So I don't use that, and for a compound radius, I find it quite interesting, because none of the methods that other people demonstrate, and the more familiar methods that I started out using, with the old, I've shown this loads of times, but somewhere in the back here, the fret leveling file, and this was from Crimson, and it's a perfectly efficacious thing. It's a nicely built thing. The wood's shrunk over the years, but you know, it's a good solid file on a block. And the problem with this is that it's so wide that at the top end it's like that, and the bottom end it's like that. And if you look at the two of them side by side, they're kind of, you can see, if you the wider the bit you deal with, the more visible the difference is between the two. If you're only dealing with a very small slice, and the smaller slice the better, then the difference between the radius at this end and that end are in the scale of the whole distance from side to side is marginal or minimal. And really that's what you want, the thinnest possible leveling tool to kind of respect, like I say, but it's the wrong word, but to accommodate the changing radius. And the radius, the smaller the smaller the segment or sector, is it? I can't remember. The smaller the bit you're doing of the whole, the less tangible the difference between the one at this end and the one at that end is. Which is why, of all the methods, this just happens to be the one that treats the compound radius with the most kid gloves or respect. This is actually a pretty good fret job. I wasn't sure because of all the compound radius bending business that I had to go into, but it's turned out really well. Which is quite good, because so was the Jaguar before that, so I've done two in a row that have been pretty good. Technically, I probably didn't even need to level either of them, but I've done it for various reasons. This one, just because I've got a really low action set, and I'd like to get it, for the sake of a bit of leveling, let's get it precise, and I can afford the leveling with the overall height of the frets. And with the other one, it was actually just because the strings weren't pulling enough curve into the neck, so it was pretty flat. So I thought I would effectively, well, I chose to just finesse the frets a little bit more, since we were kind of stuck with a pretty flat neck, unless Kenny went up a grade of strings, which we started with 9s and we stayed with 9s, so that's cool. So there's a little high one up there, look by the looks of this, but it's going to come out fine. Now this is still very low, really. So I'm going to now do the last one, the E, and then we'll get into taping it off and polishing it out and all the usual stuff to end up. So I'm very pleased with how this has turned out. It's in every respect, this is a tricky neck to do, because it's bound, which, you know, means that we have to find ways to clean out the slots, and it's tricky because it's not only bound, and cleaning the slots out is tricky. It is on any guitar that's bound, but it's doubly tricky because I had to widen the slots, and you know, that, as I mentioned before, you know, without the ability to run a saw all the way through to widen it, widening the slots by hand individually is kind of difficult. A couple of people on the Facebook page, Releft Guitars Facebook page, suggested a couple of Hosco fret tools. There's a high fret there which has come down nicely. They suggested a couple of tools which, while I haven't used them, I've made them up. You know, I've got my own sort of improvised version, but I can't quite see how they widen the frets, I have to be honest. They're good at scraping the bottom of the fret slot and cleaning it out. Now this is this nut at the moment. I'm going to shim it and glue it back in, because I think I'm pretty sure Hugh was keen to keep the original nut in there because it's of the period and so on, but it needs it needed a tiny lift. It's actually pretty spot on now. There's a tiny high spot on the G which I'd take down, but actually as it stands, it's with a tiny bit of copper foil behind it. It's not in bad, not a bad height, but I only put it in sort of temporarily just to begin with. So we have this I think, pretty well done. Now I put a new set of strings on for this because I didn't have any kicking around, so what I might just do is, rather than snap them off, I think I might just kind of hold them off for a minute, do the polishing out, and then just put them back on and just do the nut, tiny adjustment on the nut. I might even put two sheets of actually, you know what I might do? There's a technique I've used to shim the nut before, very slightly, and I use self-adhesive silver paper foil basically, and it's great because it's incredibly thin, but it also allows you to control how many layers you put on, and because it's completely flexible, you can cut it exactly to the size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the thickness of this piece of copper foil that I've used, and then I might recreate it, that thickness, with the silver stuff, because it's easier to trim. Actually, you know what, they don't really make that much difference. I suppose I can't even really see the difference. I undercut it, so there's a slight bit overhang at the end, but there you go. Maybe I'll tweak it to the exact size and do that. But yeah, so I'll leave the strings on, and I'll boost this little footing a tiny bit. Sometimes if I had a very thin piece of bone, I might even put that on the bottom of here and just boost that up from there. But since we don't, I'll do it with available materials. And this is 1/4 mil maximum, 0.2. So the question would be, how much of this foil would we need to do it? Well, first of all, let's get a bit of it adrift from its backing. It's probably I don't even know if this will register on the gauge, but we'll see. Let's have a look. 0.2, so 0.3, so about 10 bits of that. Well, actually, that's probably no good, but what I'll do is I will boost up that little bit of copper anyway, and we'll use that. 0.2, I don't think I've got any bone of that size. Sometimes it's a nice way of doing it because it's the same colour. I don't think I've got any white plastic either. Occasionally I've got a thin bit of bone in there somewhere. Let's have I've got chunky bits that would do the job. You can glue that on, but it's too thick. It would take forever and a day to thin it down. So we want a bit thicker than this, but this is quite a bit thicker. That's twice as thick, and so this is coming in at so what did I just take out? 0.16. Okay, that's 1.2, and that's coming in at 0.5, 0.4. So that's 3 times more. Bit too much. And that's tin, is it? Tin. That's the same as this. That's tin. Too much. That's tin. The only thing about the copper stuff is it's just a slightly different colour. We've got a little thin bit of plastic here, which is similar colour. Actually, we might go with that. How about that? That and some glue, and that is going to be 0.7. So we want to take a fair bit of that off, but it's the sort of right colour. Yeah, getting a very thin layer of bone is pretty impossible. Having said that, it isn't the end of the world to fit a bit of bone and bring it down, but it is quite light colour, so I'd rather use this bit of plastic. If I could just get some more cream plastic, I'd be a happy man. Well, these are all my spare bits of nuts and bone fragments. I think it's nicer to keep the original, especially if, as the rumour has it, either way, that this could well have been owned or at least played by Jimmy Page. I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I keep the frets and sell them? As owned, as played by Jimmy Page. Because there's no, whatever that word is, provenance. So we would never really know. So we'd just be guessing. Okay, so I'm going to stick this bit of cream plastic to the bottom of this. And while, like I say, it's too thick, it's at least the same colour to begin with. So we're working with something in keeping. Okay, try out, that will do. Well, it's typical, isn't it? You put it down, it spins around under pressure. Okay, that will do. It gives us actually a little bit of room to cut down because the stickiness of the slots in this guitar are an issue. I certainly was struggling to get one of the strings to move in the slot just now as I was tuning or detuning. It's not great. Okay, so that's that. That's that. Off, please. That's that. That's that. Old glasses case. Very handy. Klutz hands. Right, so okay, we could clamp it, but I think it's probably stuck pretty well. Yep. Okay. So we'll need to sand it back in a minute, but let's just leave it dry. Meanwhile, I'll get into the taping the neck and stuff that we have to do. So I'll just go off camera for that. Oh, before we tape the neck, I'll do the fret crowning, which is also important. Now, I don't know if this marker pen is staying, it's not drying quick enough. I don't know if they've changed the formula, but it's making a bit of a goo, which is annoying me, so I'm going to have to clean my crowning file just to make sure it doesn't gum up. I mean, we can leave it for a while, but while I'm at it, let's clean crowning file. Oh, that means I have to pour some, I have to get out some, I'm all out of stuff. Let's try using naphtha. Okay, so we want the jumbo side, even though it's medium. Medium. Yeah, it's fairly jumbo. Let's give it a rub down. I think it could be possibly reaching the end of its productive days, this thing. Mind you, that's cleaning this pen off quite well, but there is a fair bit stuck to it from yesterday's job, which is more than I would like to see. But you never know, it could be that after 3 or 4 years this has hit the end of its working life. Wouldn't be surprised, to be honest. I mean, it's been a long time, so we shall see. Would I buy another one? Yeah, I think I would. Kind of makes the job a lot easier than doing it the hand-held way. Okay, so I'm just going to re-profile these frets, or re-crown them. Doesn't dry. Yeah. tape there, which is a good thing. It's a relatively little amount of work needed on these, which is always a good sign of a good fret job. Yeah, all is good. That's pretty good. Only really one up there that, as I saw, needed a little bit of extra work. Okay, so now we're into the covering with masking tape and getting ready for polishing out. And while I'm doing that, I'll leave the nut to dry, and I'll also shape it and also thin it down a little bit too, so we don't have too much to cut down with at the finish point. Now, having been caught out recently with some old finish, being a bit susceptible, what's the word, delicate, what you can do is stick it on your new thermal shirt and put it on there, or your old jacket, but whatever you can get a grip on first, just to take some of the stickiness off it if you feel you need to. Don't know how much fluff this thing actually has on it, but not a lot, but it might just be enough to kind of ease off on the grip. Technically you could do it all like that. I've tended to kind of at least maybe just do the binding at this point and not join it together at the other side, just trying to minimize any risk of any pull off. Now this of course is a wooden, it's a rosewood fingerboard, so it's not going to have the same, it's not going to be susceptible to the ancient thin poly finish coming off, but probably just worth keeping that in mind for the age anyway, just as a sort of principle. Okay, so this is going to hang up, strings are dangling for a minute, and I'm going to get the board out and cut some strips to fit, and see you in a minute. Hello, it's later and it's raining. Now we've been out, had to go into Plymouth to take Claire to an eye appointment. So she's only got one good eye, and that one she'd had surgery over the years on her other one for what they call an interocular lens, and that's been successful. So she's got good vision in her right eye, but her left eye has never been very good. Well, hardly any vision at all. Anyway, point is, she's got a tiny bit of vision, but that's now being kind of reduced by a cataract. So we've been in to see what's possible, and it's quite a difficult one because there's not much vision in that eye. The National Health Service is slightly hesitant or reluctant to spend money on taking care of it. Right on the mark there with that one. So anyway, but she's quite insistent. She sort of not knows her rights, but she sticks up for her corner. So I think they'll put her on a waiting list, and I think in about 6 months she'll get that surgery done. Okay, just on the mark there for that one. So what I'm doing, I've polished out the frets, and also, oh, that's the wrong, no wonder that's That's stupid me. That's actually okay. Yeah, so what I've done is I've polished out the frets. They're all ready to restring with the final set of strings. These are the original, the strings I did the leveling with, and they're back on, so we can just reset the nut. Now the nut, I put a little shim on the bottom to keep the original nut, but it means that we get to file down the slots on this. Now I'm using a V file to begin with, just to get the sort of heavy lifting done. I think originally Hugh thought that this nut had slanted slots, but it doesn't. It's got dead straight slots, so I'm just carrying on cutting them straight. It doesn't really make a difference. Wherever you have a pressure point, if you cut the slots at an angle, you just basically move the pressure point to the front. If you keep them straight, the pressure point tends to be at the back end of the nut, and neither is better or worse than the other. So I tend to go straight and just concentrate on getting the nut slot done to the right size and depth, and making sure that we've got the strings going through the nut in a nice linear fashion, just like that. And this is such a, you can see how big an angle this is off to the side. It's pretty horrific to use it. Okay, we're now on the top one. This is also already cleaning out some of the gunge in the slots that exist already. It does take, it's got a hell of a sideways movement. If you had a locking nut here, or if this is the kind of guitar with a locking nut, that would take away a lot of the sideways force, but unfortunately this isn't. This is down to the nut to hold the string in place, which is not brilliant. It's trying to pull sideways, so we have to pretty much there. Yeah, we have to get down to the perfect height and retain enough bulk on the nut to stop it snapping sideways. And as a result, what I'm not going to do with this is I'm not going to reduce this nut any further. Normally I would when there's no sideways force, but if I reduce the nut any further, sideways force could very likely snap off that part. So that's not going to happen. So on this one now, most of the work's been done with this file here. Down to 0.3 of a mil. Nice and easy and low. I mean, the boot I put on this, the little plastic shim on the bottom of this nut is probably, well, it's not probably, is a lot bigger than it needed to be, hence we've got a fair bit of downhill work to do on these slots. Or downwards work, but that's fine. It's better to start with too much than too little. Because you can take some away, but you can't put it back on. Let's keep this thing still. Pretty much on the ball there, just round it out a little bit with this one. On the mark. Yeah, so that was we went trip into Plymouth. And yeah, get the eyes done and then back again to carry on with this. Now there's not a lot of cutting down we need to do on this end here, so it's fairly close to where we want to be. Oh, it's not quite, but it's not as far away. So I'm a little bit behind, because the other thing is when we were in Plymouth, doubled up the trips, saved money, went to the big bike shop and went and checked if they had any cardboard boxes I could have, which they did. So I came back with 2 full-size ones already. I cut them there and then on the side of the street to put them in the car. So we've got 4 good packaging sides, as I call it. So that'd be 4 guitars worth. So they're a definite good bet when I run out of cardboard. My local supplier sort of seems to have run short, I think. Maybe he's not selling as many bikes as he was used to, but anyway, so yeah, it's happiness is a secure store of cardboard upstairs. Well, actually currently it's in the car, but it will be upstairs before long, and I'll need to use some of it straight away. I quite like the way that is. Now this one is just tricky. This one, it's got to go down some, not too much, but it's got the greatest force of all pressing on it, and there is quite a bit of height there, so we're going to have to, I might try and just use the file for this and not use the V-notch. The file cuts quite well on this one, so we could possibly just get a straight down cut. But I say we have to keep that strength on the nut, otherwise there is a risk of it pulling sideways. The thinner it gets, the more likely. This is quite stiff when you're using a large file. Yeah, it's not a good design, this sideways business. I think I might just a tiny bit more. Yeah, it's not good at all, this sideways. When you look around and you see a lot of guitars made this way. I think one of the worst I ever saw was a Gretsch, vintage through-side Gretsch, and the spread on that was just mad. Looks good. Just on the mark on that one. Check this action down here, just over 1. I think I'm going to go up a tiny bit in this bass string. Half a tone. Fiddly little things. Right, we're pretty much there. Let's get one more tuning. Ah, the black stuff. It's annoying. Good to use, but messy. Try again. I think we're very close to being on target with the that thing, whatever it's called, Intonation. Right. Right, so what we have here is we have the setup part done. So I'm going to put these bits away, and the next bit will be to reassemble or put the scratch plate on and reattach the out jack socket bit. So we can lose these strings now. I was just going to say something that strikes me is what do we need to think of? Anything? Oh yeah, I need to find out what the preferred gauge of strings on this are. I think Hugh's preferred gauge is 9, but I'll just double check with him to make absolutely sure, and then we'll get this hooked up. And obviously we've got a claw that goes through to the claw. We want to add one through to the shielding here, and we also want to put one to come off the off this to the jack, which interestingly, I'm just having a look at how this works. Can't remember where I took it from, but it must have been from here. That's a weird one. Where did it go from? I can't remember now. Anyway, it's got to be out the middle one. It's got hooked up. Oh, that's right, because it's. So is this one going? Yes, one of them's going directly via, not via the tone pot. That's is that right? Has it got? No, there wasn't any tone control on the bridge one, if I recall. Anyway, I'll just have a God, there's a dead insect in here as well. Alright, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these off, I'm going to oil up the fingerboard, polish everything, and then get onto this bit. And just come back to you when this is on. There's no big fancy wiring, so I'm just going to put it all together, and then we'll meanwhile I'll find out which of the strings we're going to use and get those ready. Okay, so see you in a bit. Good morning, welcome back. Restringing Hugh's Washburn. Visits from my friendly cats. I put the maybe we could get it on. Why do I put that back on? It's just a pain. I've just made life harder for myself. I'm going to take the back plate off again because I want to get at the back for loading the strings, and I also want to be able to adjust the springs to get the tremolo about right for forward movement only, or forward down movement only. So we take these out. So all that remains here is to string it up, stretch out the strings and intonate. Not exactly boiling out here at the moment. Don't fight, you two, your friends. Fatface and Morris hanging out together in the shed, in the untidy shed. I've been busy, I promise you. That's the reason for the untidiness. Well, I don't know about, was I saying yesterday how I'd sold Tyler guitars? Well, I sold another one this morning, so pretty much almost out of stock on the wall of custom made reloved guitars. There's 3 travel sized oak casters left, which is brilliant. So that's the rent paid for next month, and trip to visit my son at Christmas taken care of as well. So I'm pleased that spare time and some investment in parts has turned into some sales, and 2, somebody who is so thrilled with the Trekkie travel guitar he bought from me that he's absolutely over the moon with it, which is so pleasing and validating. Of course, not everything will appeal to everyone, and there would be some people who it just didn't suit and so on, but B has bought the Trekkie and just loves it, so I'm very pleased with that. Like I say, I don't expect everyone to like all my guitars all the time, but the aim of the game is to sell them to people who do. I mean, kind of goes without really saying, doesn't it? So in that sense, I'm very happy. So let me just line up these tuners to get the strings through in a straight line. Not quite enough clearance really for my liking between all of these pegs, but it's a little tight as far as the real estate aspect is concerned. Okay, so stringing these in the usual way. I pull the full length of the up to the nut, pull the string tight, and then pull back a fret's worth to leave just enough to wrap around and lock the string off, which seems to be a quite good little balance. Get rid of these. I've kind of got myself an extra task to do this weekend, and it's Mark's custom Strat. I've kind of been looking at it, and we bought Seymour Duncan classic stacks to fit in it, and it's reminded me yet again, I think this is the last time I'm going to buy Seymour Duncan's, to be honest, because they do something so odd with their spacing that for someone who's building a guitar, it makes it kind of a bit impossible to work with, actually. They've their pickup spacing, okay, where's my choppers? The pickup spacing is just bizarre. It kind of defies logic. Their pickup spacing is on the humbuckers is too small, so they're always too narrow for a standard bridge, which means the strings end up going to the outside. So a bridge pickup, the narrowest bridge you're going to get on a modern guitar is 52.5, and you would think if the bridge pickup is right next to the bridge, you would expect the strings to come off the bridge at 52.5 and maybe narrow to, what should we say, 52 by the time they hit the bridge pickup, because it's so close. So you'd want spacing of 52-ish, 51 at the minimum. But guess what? Seymour Duncan bridge spacing is 48. In their, well, not in their stuff, in DiMarzio's documents, they claim that 48 was the original, and they're probably right, I'm not saying they're not, but they say that the 48 is the original Gibson humbucker spacing. Well, that may be the case, however, it doesn't work with even the narrowest modern bridges. So there literally is no kind of bridge you could fit that would leave on a standard Seymour Duncan or DiMarzio 48mm spaced humbucker. There's no bridge you could get today that would leave those strings placed over the pickup poles, even at the bridge. And yet, when you get down to the other end and you buy a Seymour Duncan single coil, these are too wide. Okay, so the humbuckers are too narrow and the single coils are too wide. So on Mark's Strat, I've built the scratch plate to basically leave the treble strings right over the poles at the expense of the bass strings, which are just a bit off to one side of the poles, which is all you can do because there is no narrower spacing that you can get for those pickups. The only thing you could do was maybe fit a 56mm bridge. Then of course it would be miles off even their widest humbucker, which is the trembucker. So the bottom line is their settings don't work even internally consistently, which just drives me nuts, because a lot of customers like Seymour Duncans for the sound, but they just keep finding they don't seem to make sense in terms of building a guitar. Now, you know, on Mark's guitar, I got a trembucker, which is about 51.5 for the bridge, and that just about makes the bridge work. But after that, it should get smaller than the 52, and in fact, what you find is when you get down, when you look at the measurement of the stacks, I think the poles, I can't remember exactly, but I think they came out at 52 for the middle and the neck. Now, given that the spacing is only just about 52 at the bridge, by the time you've got to the neck, you're at 48 or 49, and that's 3mm off the center. So something has to pay for it, i.e. one of the pickup, you know, some of the strings are not going to be in the correct position. And I opted for leaving the treble strings over the center. Mark said since that he'd prefer it half and half, you know, like a spread, so it didn't kind of look off balance, which I'm going to do. So in order to do that, I have to make another scratch plate, which is a drawn out process, I have to say, but to do one by hand. So it's not ideal, but I'm not annoyed at Mark. He's got every right to want it the way he wants it. I'm annoyed at Seymour Duncan. And actually, I can say between you and me, I'm not going to be buying them again. I'll be aiming for anything else that has the right spacing. I can't seem to get an answer from anybody about why Seymour Duncan does this. Doesn't seem to bear any relation to anything. Light as a feather to play, so I'm going to stretch again. So yeah, I don't know, Seymour Duncan, forget it. Maybe I can. I'll tell you what does work. They're little 59s and JB Juniors. They're good. I think they're good spacing for bridge pickups. And the Trembucker, sorry, Trembucker spacing. I think they call it F spacing, but the Trembucker spaced humbuckers are good for a modern 52mm bridge at the bridge position. Outside of that, forget it. Aha. Ping. D. Ping on the D, ping on the D. Let's just tweak that before we go any further. Yeah, so that's it. I'm not gonna bother with any further Seymour Duncans. Certainly not in the neck position. Or the middle position. Certainly not single coils like that. Bizarre, really. Anyway. It's not the first time it's cost me. Actually, the first time round it cost me having to keep the regular standard spaced humbucker and buy for Mark, another Mark's guitar. I had to buy a Trembucker space, and I found somewhere to use that later. But it wasn't ideal. But in this case, one of the other ways around it was to look at, I had a look at whether DiMarzio made a decent stacked hum cancelling single coil, and they do, but guess what, nowhere on their site does it offer you any clear idea about what the spacing is. Yeah, so I sent them an email saying, come on, we need this information. And I certainly won't buy that until I know I have that information clear. And the question then would be, well, do I go ahead and buy a new set of humbuckers at 150 quid and get left with two Seymour Duncans that I can't really use on any standard build that I might ever make? And the answer is not really. So the truth is, I'm just going to have to spend the time building another pickguard, and that's what Seymour Duncan costs me. Because basically, I couldn't find out beforehand what the spacing was. For these classic stacks. And it's a real pity, because you sort of, and it sounds silly, but you start off by assuming that that the Seymour Duncan makes pickups that will fit in, a bridge that you might find on a guitar made on planet Earth. right? And it doesn't, and I don't know what they make it for. Okay, so we've got an issue here with this. We've got a problem with this. This sticks up too high, and that's because at the moment we've got three. I'll take this off to turn it upside down, but we've got three springs on the back, and because of the angle that the screws have been set in at, they end up leaving the claw sticking out the back. The top of the claw sticks up. Now a way around that would be to pull it all down further, but that will be too stiff. So counter to that, we could remove one of these springs, okay, for example. Now that gets too soft, and what we can probably do is drive these further in, and with a bit of luck that will pull down. It'll restore us back to our correct amount of tension, which we want. We don't want it to move when we bend the strings. It's moving a little bit. So we want it pulled back and stiff with these 9s on, and actually the further in it is the better, for the point of view of not having it sticking up in the back plate, which is what was annoying Hugh. So I'm trying to, by removing the spring, we force the screws to go further in to hold back the thing under tension. And we want a bit of downward movement, but we don't want it too stiff, so it's a balance between the two. But the good thing is that in reducing the springage, we've increased the screwing inage, which then means the claw is further away and doesn't get in the way of them. Okay, so if it's light, the problem you got is when you bend strings, you get accompanying open strings will detune slightly. If you set it tight enough, stiff enough to stop that happening, so that you can actually still bend strings without any downward tuning of any open strings reverberating, playing, then what you get is a stiffer operation. So I think we're going to have to just strike a balance between the two. There's no real choice. It still feels quite light, actually. So what you're really listening out for is when you bend this, like that. That's pushing, you can hear it's just slightly pushing the open string down. It's still just about light. I'll tweak it a tiny bit more, and then we'll stop there. And just, there's pretty much almost no more inward we can screw it. But that's now beautifully out of the way of the plate on the back. See, it's still going to do it a little bit. A little bit too low, the action, so we have to tweak that up now. We've sat this back on its tail. I think that's going to be it. To do it otherwise just means we're going to end up with this plate sticking out again, which isn't a good thing. The fault there is in the original positioning, or the original angle of the screws here. They were put in too steep an angle, which basically left the edge of the claw sticking up, which when you had loads of springs on, stayed too far out and too high up the slope, which caused this plate to stick up. Now we've taken a spring away, the angle's the same, but we've drawn the claw further back into the body to get a nice stable action. But we can't do that. We can't have absolute stability. Actually, it's not true. We could block the thing off completely and then you'd have no movement when you bend, no downward movement when you bend. But this is now flat. This is now resistant to palm movement, but it does have that tiny bit of flex when you bend the note. Not an awful lot actually, but it is there at the extreme bends. It pulls just enough. Like I say, the only way to get rid of that would be to add the spring back on, but then we'd have the plate buckling out, and unless we took the screws out, refilled the whole thing out and replaced the screws. But something that powerful going into something that's been drilled and refilled in that small space is not a good idea. Okay, just check these through. That one's a bit low. It's the only one that is. So the next stage along here will be to check the intonation. Hard guitar to balance up here. Ping there on the A string. Get the A, correct one for the A slot. 42. Just looking to free it up. Tiny ping there on the D. This is a straight through one, so it doesn't take too much to clear. I was going to put a tiny bit more relief into the neck. It's very flat, so I might just do that. Not a lot, but just a little bit. So that will be, we just want to slacken the truss rod a tiny fraction. God, there's a cold breeze coming in here now. So today I'm doing this, then I'm going to go to a physio session for my back, hopefully continue to improve things. Wrong size, it's the 5mm one. Yeah, physio session, and then I'm going to start work on Adam's kits. Fair few of those ready to go. Right, let's just have a look. it's pretty low, but it feels very low because of how flat it is. Relatively flat. Might just tweak a tiny fraction more. Tiny variation. I'm not even sure if it moved the first time, but we shall see. Test on the amplifier. Not easy to balance it on here without squishing the jack socket. A bit of the old juice in there. I did the pots, but I didn't do in there. It's a bit annoying, but hey. It's a very old, ancient style switch. Funnily enough, in my long experience, it's less the cleaner that does the work, but actually using it, because the contact surfaces get gummed up over years from not really being used that much. Okay, let's just tune this. Okay, it's working. We'll leave that plugged in there for a second. We will get the tuner up for the intonation bit. Kind of hoping that it's close to where we want it, because there isn't a ton of room left on that bridge for moving around. Let's try and support this a little bit. That's okay. Okay, too short. Let's drag it back. Move. Interesting, the position of these saddles are a bit wonky. Kind of sits over the edge of the saddle. Pain in the butt. Kenny asked me a question on Facebook. earlier this week about intonation and tuners, you know, and what was the right thing to get, and I sort of explained to him my understanding was, when you consider that this massive variable, i.e. how you fret the note, is a major variable. There's so much variability in it, insofar as I might not fret the same note twice, far less two different people having any consistency in how they fret the note, and how your measuring of intonation is dependent entirely on this moment here. You know, so the idea of, given there's so much variation in that, and no two people do it the same, and no one person does it the same 2 times in a row, otherwise known as twice in the English language, get what I mean? It should tell anyone with a kind of logical head that there is an enormous amount of variation in that variable, in which case the idea of spending a ton of money on some sort of supersonic NASA styled oscilloscope tuning device is a mug's game, really, because you've still got at play this one thoroughly uncontrollable variable. See, I can make that go sharp, or I can make it play. Ping there on the E. It's good. Just going to take care of that last little ping on the E, and we should be done. So yeah, it's a funny one. I mean, if you watch my stuff, you'll know that I'm pretty logical. I try to be logical in everything I do, just because it's the only way to be, as far as I'm concerned. And you know, if you kind of line up all the variables in this mixture, if you honestly acknowledge the variables in this formula called intonation, and one of them, as you can see, principal one is the actually there's a couple that we don't take into consideration enough. One of them is definitely the well, in intonation, one of them is the strength with which I press the note down, and you know, you can see it varies between everyone. So I could set this up to be intonated for the way in which I press notes down. I fret notes typically, and then I can set the intonation correctly for that. And then the person who gets the guitar back can pick it up, test the intonation for themselves and go, well, that's out. No, it's out because they play differently from me. But it's very difficult to factor that in because I can't be them. And the point being, of course, is the amount of pressure makes a difference. Equally, I've had recently one situation where somebody's guitar went back and they weren't happy. And I sorted it out by, well, they sent me a recording of how they pluck the strings and the sound they were getting. And the sound was, the two things happened. One is the sound was caused by the fact that the nut slots were cut a bit low, but it was cut a bit low for their playing style. Mine, I'd sort of done it for a lighter hand, which was more like me, but quite rightly, it wouldn't quite work with their style. But the thing it really showed me was, as I think I mentioned before, but I think it really showed me was, reminded me that how somebody plays is another variable over which I have no control other than to know what it is in the first place. And I haven't been doing that. So from now on, I'm determined to find out from every customer who sends a guitar. I need to have a short, very brief example of them playing in the normal sort of knock around style, so I know, I get just a heads up on how hard they hit it or not, because I don't think I can carry on doing this as sustainably, not knowing that variable, but also it reminds me of the other variable that we can have no control over. Which is the way somebody plays or frets the 12th fret. Now, that's not so good. That's broken. Where's that broken? At the top. It's broken at the tuning peg. It's not good at all. When's that loose? Am I imagining that? No. Okay, well, I've got a spare 9, thankfully. But and now I've got to get it past the bleeding back plate. That's a downside of doing lots of stretching when you set the guitar up, but that's what I always do, and that's why having a spare 9 is really handy. So that's that. Luckily I have a few knocking about here. Anyway, after I've done this, I'm going to move on to the kits, Adam's kits. So they're time to get them out of the box and get them into service. Thankfully, I got ahead of the game in the tail end of the summer when the weather was decent. I got the 2 of them painted up, ready. So we're ahead of the game, which is pretty good. So I can carry on. I struggle a bit now with the weather as it is to do any spraying, but we had a good burst of sun. It worked perfectly. Right. This isn't a 3-a-side, it's a standard 6 in a line. I suspected this nut and the pressure on the side because of the spacing of the strings, but it's not the nut, it's broken at the machine end, the tuner thingy. Tuner post. If there is something about that that's sharp, then we may find breaks again, but hope not. I'm going to do a quarter of a turn this way, quarter of a turn this way. I want to make sure they're all touching so there's no vibration as well, because that can sometimes get really annoying. A tiny bit loose. Come on, thank you. Okay. Okay, we're done. Thank you for watching.